And hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another insightful session today, where we're going to try to understand the importance of being able to manage, track, and govern your supplier's commitment towards their contractual obligations. So that's the topic for today. My name is Vikram. I lead global pre-sales at Avenir, and I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with some context, around this topic of today, right? So we've all seen that a lot has changed over the last 2 years. And needless to say, the pandemic has forced us all to rethink, redesign, and re-innovate the way we do things across all spheres, whether it's personal or professional. The one thing that has emerged as a fact that can, no longer be ignored or simply put aside as a luxury is the indispensable role that technology is going to play, especially as we head out into an uncertain and unpredictable future. And we have seen how technology has helped us, uh, get connected and stay connected, get work done, get business moving, and in general, keep the momentum going across all facets of life. But now, the lifeline of every business, whether it's private, public, government, is the contract. And its governance is the key to execute the relationship between parties to the contract. So, a typical contract life cycle is what you're seeing here right now, where it goes through various phases, starting with design, which includes drafting or assembling a contract, along with its relevant terms, annexures, and appendices, to the point where you finally negotiate the contract and bring it in effect. Now, you need to measure the performance of all involved parties to the contract to make sure you're getting from your suppliers what they have agreed to. And this performance measurement involves analysis of contractual obligations and related data, measurement of how well are your suppliers meeting and fulfilling the obligations, and these would have a profound impact on your future business strategy and policy. For example, if you find out that many of your suppliers are, let's say, unable to provide you an audit report of their processes every quarter, it could mean that the obligation that you're expecting the suppliers to meet may be a bit unrealistic, and hence you may want to think about having more achievable terms going forward. I mean, this is just an example of how insights from tracking obligations can play a key role in shaping your future business contracts. But to be able to do that efficiently, you really need a technology solution that can help you track and review these obligations with high efficiency. Why? Because of a number of reasons. A lot of factors make the management of obligations extremely challenging. For example, in any organization, it's not one or 10, but hundreds or even thousands of contracts. And add to that globally distributed stakeholders in different time zones, manual, inefficient, and time consuming processes, and you have to deal with systems that are disconnected, forcing you to manually fill in the breaks and gaps. And all the other factors that you see here, they don't just add, but they multiply the challenges in efficiently governing your contract's performance. And so, what's the result? I mean, the biggest result is reduced value that you get from your contracts. That may impact your revenue, expose you to unmitigated risks, and ultimately just be the cause of a deteriorating relationship with your vendors. And so, from our experience, having been in this industry as a technology provider for managing contracts, we have compiled together this list of 10 common pitfalls that most organizations encounter. Out of these, the ones that hurt the most, or some of these that hurt the most, are: contracts are usually negotiated with more focus on managing the risk aspect instead of focusing more on the economic value that you can get from that contract. Why? It's obvious. It's because if you don't have an efficient way of managing and tracking obligations, you are inevitably going to focus on negotiating provisions that help you allocate risk. And then there is this other factor that there is limited or virtually no process available to govern contracts efficiently. And hence, the common consequence is poor governance and poor visibility into supplier obligations and their commitments to them. And what happens as a result of this is, in general, a 9.2% of value erosion aggregated from contracts as per an industry research statistic, which I'm sure many of you all have heard in the past. But what this means is that if you have contracts, let's say worth $1 billion with your suppliers across all your suppliers, as an example, you would generally tend to lose around $92 million across all your contracts. That's 9.2%. Directly or indirectly, if you don't have an efficient technology driven process in place to monitor and track and review obligations. So let's do a poll before we proceed further. Let's get some engagement. The question is, how do you handle your obligations today? Is it all manual, like by using Excel, Word, and Google Docs and other such tools? Or do you have a contract repository? Or do you use an AI based solution, an artificial intelligence based solution? Let's see the answers. The answers are coming in, and we should have the results soon. Okay, so if you can see the responses here, uh, it's clear. I mean, almost all of you are doing tracking obligations manually today, and I think very few, a very small percentage, uses some kind of an AI based discovery mechanism, right? And so that's why we are here today, to see how our solution, Avenue's obligation flow, can address these aspects. And as we move towards the demo of our solution today, let's just understand some of the big ticket challenges that our solution aims to solve. To start with, if you want to be able to monitor and track obligations, you have to first identify those obligations from your contracts. This is a time consuming and painful job. And so in our demo, Vivek shall show you how this is addressed using artificial intelligence. And then you have this, what I like to call as the black hole syndrome, essentially lack of visibility or no visibility into when you need to review an obligation, what's the status of the supplier's fulfillment towards those obligations and commitments, and so on, right? There's just no visibility. And once again, as we get into the demo, Vivek shall show you how Avenir Obligation Flow provides you unprecedented visibility into your obligations. Last but not the least, of course, as they say, and this is the best part, if it's everyone's job, someone will do it because anyone can do it, but nobody does it. So, ownership. So, who really owns the obligation? So, again, in our demo, Vivek shall show you how you can assign clear and unambiguous ownership to the obligations. So, with that, let's just do one last poll before handing it off to Vivek for the demo. So the question is, where do you experience greatest pain in managing your obligations today? Is it in identifying and extracting the obligations from your contracts, ownership, tracking obligations, or maybe responding to some kind of jeopardy situations? Okay, looks like a large percentage is facing challenges in tracking obligations. And of course, there is a certain percentage that's also facing challenges in being able to identify obligations and responding to jeopardy situations. So that's great insights. That's good to know. So, with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Vivek for a demo. Vivek, over to you.
Setting up the context. Let me share my screen. Vikram, can you see my screen? Vikram, can you
Vivek,
please confirm?
I can. Yep.
All right. Okay. So welcome everyone for the demonstration of Avni's contract obligation flow. So here you can see I'm on a dashboard with Avni's badging and the obligation flow badging as well. And as Vikram mentioned, obligation flow helps you extract maximum value out of the contract by better managing the obligations. Now here on this dashboard we have lots of information. As you can see, there is information which is operational, there is information on the right hand side which is strategic, and all these information that is being represented in graphs and charts and table to make it more user friendly. And this particular dashboard resolves the pain point that we saw, that most of you are talking about, that tracking the obligations, right? So this dashboard will be a really helpful dashboard to identify and track your obligations. We will come to this dashboard towards the end of the contract, but let's understand what whose dashboard it is first of all, right? Like here I'm logged in with Melissa, and Melissa is the persona who could be your contract manager, the contract administrator, and Melissa would be working with different stakeholder to make sure all the obligations that have been committed as part of signed contract are acted upon. Now, uh, uh, one of the aspect of obligation flow is to identify the obligations, right? So let's understand how the obligations are extracted, and it is clear from the poll as well. We face challenge in identifying the obligations, right? So what I've done here is I have ingested a contract, okay, which is a master services agreement. This is a signed master services agreement between Northstar and Astra Germany. This is a fairly complex 117-page contract with a lot of metadata and provisions, clauses on it, along with different annexures to it. Okay, so if your contract is split into different documents, no worries, you can ingest those contract into the system. Like if you have a quasi contract, a term sheet, a quotation along with your main agreement, you can ingest that, and system will be able to identify obligations out of it. Now, Vikram was talking about driving the obligations management using advanced technologies, right? Now, in absence of a product like Avani's contract flow, which is an intelligent product, in absence of that, Melissa will have to, if at all she has to identify obligations out of it, since this is a third party paper contract, she will really have to, read this document carefully to understand, where all different provisions have been captured by the counterparty. And she will essentially have to read through this contract, highlight those obligations, compile them into an Excel sheet, and work with different stakeholders to work on those obligations. Now, this is a manual and laborious job which involves a lot of effort and energy, because one has to carefully read through this document. And if the organization are signing the contract on counterparty a lot, then of course these efforts are multiplied with the number of contracts, because no two contracts from two different counterparties are going to be same. So Melissa will end up reading through all these contract carefully and spending the same amount of time and energy for all those contracts, right? So to make life easy of Melissas of the world, what we have here is we have discover obligation. Okay, I'm going to hit this with this. Our AI engine, the obligation flow is empowered with AI engine, and our AI engine is trained on thousands of data points to formulate a cognitive intelligence, right? So as the engine is kicked in, you can see that the engine is reading through this contract and trying to identify different obligations. And here on the right hand side, you can see that the system have identified different obligations. uh, if at all you one needs to add manually a few additional obligations, they can certainly do it here. But let's understand what the system have done for us in terms of identifying the obligations, right? So let's understand what's the first obligation that the system has identified here. Under the obligation description, you can see that it talks about supplier must conduct a customer satisfaction survey about the goods and services that the supplier is providing, and the survey must happen each year. And if at all the satisfaction levels falls below 90%, the supplier will have to provide a remedial action plan. Now, all these obligations that you see, they are in gray color with exclamation mark. That means the contract manager really have to confirm them. But now, let's say, based on the identified obligation description, Melissa is not able to make out a decision that if at all this is a credible obligation or not. All she has to do is just click on this box, and the system will take Melissa to the bookmark from where in the document it has extracted this obligation. Now, with the additional reference above and below of this identified text, Melissa can formulate the decision that this is a credible obligation to track. Right now, let's understand what all details it captures on top of the obligation description here. Now, here you can see we have the prioritization. We can clearly highlight the critical ones, so that we one can act on these obligations with reference to the priorities. Here, the next field that you see here, we have accountable obligation, accountable person, which is our contract manager, Melissa. And it's because she is answerable to all the obligations that have been committed as part of this contract. But is Melissa going to work on all these contract obligations? Because no, because these obligations will be on different departments internally, right? Few of these obligations will be on HR department, few of them will be on your IT, security, compliance, so on and so forth. So here we have responsible person, who is Michelle, who's going to act upon this particular obligation that has been identified by the system. One of the challenge that Vikram talked about is setting up the obligations. So what we have understood from our different customer, that at times it really becomes difficult to trace down who is actually owning these obligations, right? So here we can set the obligation correctly. If at all it is external, that means the counterparty is going to own that, or it is within the company, that means internal, this obligation is owned by the organization itself, right? Then we have additional fields being captured here on top of the one I talked about here, the another important category, you can see that we can categorize the identified obligation. Now here, the categorization will help you understand where all the efforts are going in managing the obligation, what kind of obligations the organization is getting into, and take subsequent action on that. So here, I'm flagging this particular obligation as a delivery, and it's related to delivery of documents, right? um, the another and very important metadata that system captures is the frequency here, right? We have different frequencies like one-time frequency, weekly, and annually and quarterly. So here, this particular obligation, what it says as, throughout the tenure of the contract, the supplier must act on the customer satisfaction survey each year, right? So the frequency tends to be the annual frequency, right? Because this satisfaction survey will be conducted each year throughout the tenure. So I'll set this as annually, and then if at all, how are we going to measure, how is the obligations is being performed. So clearly, this particular obligation talk about a satisfaction survey, which will of course happen outside the system. Once the supplier conducts and submits the survey, that particular report can be brought into the system as a manual record. So hence the measurement frequency is set here as manual. However, if at all you have some SLA related obligations, like how much time the system was up, and so on and so forth, as long as we have that data available in obligation flow product, we can also automate that measurement, how the fulfillment of that obligation is happening. Okay, for the moment I'm going to set this as manual mode, and here you can see that there is a start date and end date to the term is already captured. Okay, so with this, I'm confident, me as Melissa, confident that this is a credible obligation that one has to track throughout the journey of the tenure of the contract. So I will mark this as a saved contract, a saved obligation. So with this, what will happen is, you can see that the obligation turns from gray to green with the check flag on. Now let's understand another obligation here. Let me bring up one more. This one, okay, so this one talks about the bank guarantee that the supplier must provide, right? It's a 10% bank guarantee of the total price that the supplier has to provide before the contract starts execution. Now this one is of course is of high priority because it talks about payments. We can also categorize this into payments, so that we can manage and track our obligations carefully here. This I'm going to set it as one time because of course the bank guarantee will be submitted before the actual supply starts, right? So I can set this to one time, and I can save this. So out of all these obligations that I have, that the system have proposed to me as contract manager, I have taken a call that I just want to track these two obligations going ahead. Now this is the first aspect of obligation management, is to extract the or identify the obligation, and where the technology is coming to help to extract those obligations based on the trained AI engine, right? Now let's understand the second aspect of the obligation management, which is to fulfill these obligations, right? Now this particular obligation, which talks about action items to be performed in terms of conducting the satisfaction survey each year, right? Like, so there the action has to happen at least 5 times throughout the tenure. So let's see how the fulfillment happens against these obligations. Okay, now here you can see that on the left hand side we have the obligation card view here, which we just confirmed, and on the right hand side you can see that the system has converted this obligation into different tasks, because those action has to be performed for the defined term, right? Here you can see for the first year there is one task, and subsequently throughout the term there are different tasks being added throughout the tenure here, right? So let's understand what all things does a fulfillment task uh, you know um, captures here. So here in detail, you'll see that the obligation task will get assigned to the obligation owner as well as the responsible person. And on the task due date, the system will trigger an email notification to both of them to act upon those obligation. And of course, Michelle will oversee it, assuming that the Michelle will work on this particular obligation. She need to she will work with the counterparty, get the cash satisfaction survey. And if at all there is an evidence, like the report that she wants to upload, that the customer has really done the survey, so I'll upload that evidence here under the task, and we can attach as many as evidences here for this particular task. And then we can mark this particular obligation as closed, right? So with that, me as a fulfillment owner, I have performed my duties, and with that, uh, our obligation is met and worked upon, and we can notify the obligation owner as well that the task has been performed. Now, this is the second aspect, right? Like the first one helps you identify the obligations based on AI. The second one, using the ServiceNow framework, helps you convert those action items into tasks, and then notification and dashboard help you manage those obligations, right? So let's understand the dashboard here. As I have completed the fulfillment of the obligation, that will get reflected here on the real time basis, right? Here you can see that in my obligations, you have all the personal obligation on which Melissa is working. She get to view all the obligations that she has to work along with. Who's the responsible person, what's the frequency, in what status it is, right? Whether it is in fulfillment, whether it is triggered through jeopardy, so on and so forth, right? She get all the operational information to keep a tab on all the open obligation that she's working upon. Now, if at all one has to have a zoomed out view of what is happening across the organization, here on the right hand side you can see we can represent that information in terms of by owner, and in what status all those obligations are. So here clearly you can see most of the obligations are in pending status. So we really need to introspect into as a business to see how fast we can push these obligations to the closed complete state, right? At the bottom here you can see the information being represented in graphical manner to have a better user experience. And here clearly one can just by looking at the graph can see that 40% of obligations are spent in audit. They are related to audit. So it's evident that the organization is spending more efforts in managing the audit related obligations. So this will give you insight to take corrective actions, and a business informed decision to maybe to change audit related clauses when you negotiate, so that the obligations goes down, and then we as an organization work on the important obligations uh, carefully, right? On the right hand side, the graph with the, to take corrective decisions, like if at all the obligations are open by what all pending obligations are there. Here you will see by different categories and different the count. Here of course you can see audit one is leading the chart with different obligations. Then we have delivery, so on and so forth, right? So this is how the system will help you track your obligations. Of course, there are notifications being sent out to act upon, if at all the task is overdue, so on and so forth. And all these information that you see here gets updated real time basis. So that's it from my side. Thank you. Over to you, Colin.
Hey, can you hear me? Hey, so I had a quick question. Thank you very much for that demo and the presentation. It's fantastic. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to lean in and ask them. One question I had for you, Vikram and Vivek, is what is the effectiveness of your AI to extract any kind of contract obligation clauses? If you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, um, Colin. So that's a great question, and it's important that that the AI extraction is accurate. Okay, because we are really trying to solve this problem where people in organizations don't have to spend time just trying to manually identify obligations from a contract, right? So our aim is really to give them a way where they can just, as you saw in the demo, hit a button that extracts obligations, and pretty much accurate with very high levels of accuracy. And we have seen that our AI models are pretty accurate in that sense, because we've trained it across many thousands of data points. So our models know what exactly an obligation looks like. For example, a payment obligation, a delivery or a lead time obligation, a quality obligation. These are things that we've specifically trained our AI models on. And in addition, there is one more feature that we have in our application, which is you have the option to feed in certain sample obligations into what we call as an obligation library. So what that does is, let's say our AI model, extracts say 15 or 20 obligations, from a contract. Now, what it would do is it would then match it against the obligations that you have fed into the library. And when I say match it, I don't mean a word by word match. I mean an underlying intent based match, again using artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
So what it does is it kind of shows you those obligations which are your most which you have fed into library, which we assume that those are the obligations that you're really interested in tracking across all your contracts, right? So that kind of gives a lot more leverage and control into the hands of the users. So our model will, let's say, extract 20 obligations, but you now have the capability to tell the machine that, hey, you know what? If you find any of these, show me those first. So it kind of, shows, highlights them and prioritizes those obligations.
Tell us a bit, like, can it pull like any kind of complex metadata, your AI?
Yes, the answer is yes, and that's more to do with the contract life cycle, the early stage of the contract life cycle, especially when you're let's say this use case that you're talking about is more relevant to when you're drafting a contract on a third party
Right.
paper, right? So you receive a contract from an external party, and then you manually are reading through the contract just to identify the metadata. But then again, we have an AI model, a very highly trained AI model that is able to read through the contract and extract all the metadata, like start date, the term of the contract, the limitation of liability, and all sorts of metadata. So, I mean, in short, yeah, we have AI models that is able to extract metadata earlier on in the life cycle of the contract, as well as obligations, which is post signature, right? So, yeah, hope that answers.
Yeah. So one other question somebody just pinged me, and just like what we have a lot of confusion in our market right now with a lot of different kind of contract lifecycle management systems, knowledge management systems. I Can you tell us how like Avenir kind of fits in the overall picture? Just kind of give us a sense, like we have the Icertuses, the Congas, the Ironclads, the Malbecs, the Link Squares, Noble, the Eversorts, in drilling down, like and just pulling obligation clauses. How does Avenir like show up in the market and give a different differentiation? Like, what are you doing a little different than what we've seen, up to date? Just give us a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. So first of all, we are a platform player. So we leverage the powerful ServiceNow platform. So our application is built on ServiceNow, which means that there's a lot of configurability and flexibility in our systems.
Flexible.
So it's not like what you see is what you get. Rather, it's what you want is what you get, I'd say, because you can configure literally everything from the page layouts to adding custom fields to your customized reports, dashboards. workflows, approvals, and all of that, right? So that's a
Yeah.
real big advantage. And the other thing is, being built on the ServiceNow platform, we are specifically preferred when it comes to the procurement side of contracts. Of course, we do support all kinds of contracts. We have customers who are using our solutions for even their sales contracts. When it really comes to the buy side of things, that's what where our solution is really uh,
Yeah.
uh, and so
Yeah.
that's where we really have a distinct advantage. So we are preferred. Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's why I asked the question, like, of your integrations, like, because a lot of the use cases on the market are on either Salesforce, SAP, and I've used ServiceNow, and the utilization of that system alone and all you can do, and it's like pretty robust. Yeah, just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to talk about that because that is a
Yeah.
real differentiator. Um,
And Colin, I also want to add that it's we are not just a point solution provider. So a lot of the other competitors you talked about, many of them, they have point solution providers. They have one solution for addressing a specific problem. We have a suite of products, that addresses a range of problems in the procurement side of business operations. We've got RFP automation solutions, invoice processing and automation solutions, and of course, contract management and obligation management, which are our flagship products. So it's what if you have taken our one product from us, and going down the line, there may be need for automating certain other aspects of your procurement operations. So we have solutions to address those. So you can have a suite of solutions from us in the longer term. So that's another big advantage.
so is there a typical customer profile? Is it like an enterprise? Is it kind of mid level, or is it kind of all of the above because you have different offerings?
Yeah, so generally, our products are targeted for the enterprise. And again, let me go back to the fact that we are built on the ServiceNow platform, which is an enterprise platform of platforms. That's the way they position it, right? And ServiceNow, is pretty well adopted by over 7,000 customers all across the
Wow.
globe. And so pretty much all of them are basically our target, right? So we serve that sector, the enterprise sector, as well as, of course, the mid segment. We are very suitable there as well. So if you're looking to solve your procurement operations challenges, like whether it's RFP or contract management obligations, as is the topic of the day, we are a perfect fit there.
So I'd imagine companies that are kind of scaling really quick, would be your kind of targets that are just like on service now, looking at contract systems to be like huge targets right now, right?
Yeah, they are. And again, that said, you know even if, let's say, a company does not have or own the ServiceNow platform, that's also fine, because even in that case, we do have an offering for them as well. They don't need to own the ServiceNow platform necessarily, because we do OEM our application along with the platform, and so they just use it just like any other SaaS application, right? So that's definitely an offering that we have. So we can target both segments.
So one of the things, like, when we do some of these webinars, like we ask some of the hard questions as well, right? It's like when we do one with Conga, like, we know like their implementations are very, very hard, right? You need a sales, you need somebody like really technical involved from the start to get going. What is your integrations like? Like, when somebody, let's say somebody selects you, like, is there a big turnaround to get it up and running? Do you need like software engineers on board for every tweak along the way? Is there something you can kind of customize yourself? What does that look like?
Okay, that's a very good question that you've asked. Okay, and uh, let me give you let me start off by giving you an indicative turnaround time. Again, let me say that's indicative, based on real experiences, real implementations that we've done with our customers. Uh, on an average, we define um, the time based upon the number of contracts. I'm sorry, the number of contract types. Like, for example, a master service agreement is a contract type, an NDA is a contract type, right? And the number of associated workflows with each contract type. And generally, we say it's a 1 week turnaround for one contract type. So let's say you're setting up five different contract types, and you want to run obligations as well on those contract types. We are really talking about 5 weeks or 6 weeks at best for a complete turnaround. Now, of course, there would be some exceptions, and again, this is, like I said, just indicative, because for each customer we need to do a deep dive, understand what their specific requirements are. But in most of the cases that we have implemented, this is the turnaround time that we've seen, that which is really very fast. If you see, and in terms of to what extent, the implementation requires technical folks or not. Let me say that our implementations are mostly configuration. And again, that's because, going back to the fact that we are on the ServiceNow platform, it's all administrative configuration. There is very little, coding, if at all required. It may be required for setting up the integration processes with different systems, but the application itself is largely just configuration, whether it's setting up workflows, approvals, new charts, new dashboards, setting up custom fields, whatever it may be. It's all administrative configuration, and that's the reason why we are able to turn around an implementation way faster than some of the competitors that you've just talked about.
Let me. Is it something that's on your roadmap as well? Like that's outside, like just contract just contract. What about kind of compliance issues or the larger legal teams? Do you have any kind of use cases in around like any kind of document flows or workflows? Have you looked at that? Have you looked at that space? I know like ServiceNow's got a lot of like workflow tools as well that solve for that. Are you utilizing any of that stuff for your advantage?
So we actually leverage a lot of ServiceNow capabilities in our applications already. If that's your question, if I understood your question correctly,
Yeah.
and which is what makes it very convenient for organizations that already have the ServiceNow platform, because changing a workflow, or adding a new field, or adding in an approval process, for example, is just plain and simple ServiceNow configuration.
Yeah.
And let's say if you already have ServiceNow administrators in your organization, they already know how to do that. They don't even, I mean, we don't even need to train them, because they know it. So that's a real big advantage, and that's where I was probably talking earlier, or maybe in some other conversation as well, that companies will really see a large return on their investment on the ServiceNow platform by using our solutions, because we are just leveraging everything that ServiceNow provides, including uh, excuse me, including things like security, right? So user security, who should see what, which user has what privileges, who should see what kind of contracts, who should not see what kind of contracts, all of that is governed by standard access controls, as you configure in ServiceNow. So that's a big advantage.
Yeah. I think Vikram, I'm done with my questions. I had like four specific ones, a couple of follow-ups. Um, I'm just going to throw it back out to any attendees if there's any other follow-up questions. If not, I will share contact information from both Vikram and Vivek with everybody, and follow up with a copy of the recording and the slide decks afterwards. Uh, Vikram, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Vivek, thank you for the demo. That was really insightful. I think this was awesome. I really appreciate it, guys. And
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you, Avenir, for the partnership today. Hope to see you all guys soon. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.